Us. So we are live. I hope that you guys can see our labels for our names. I don't see them on our screen. However, this is Trent Telenko, and some of you guys might already follow him on X. But we're here today to talk about a post that I made that has been getting a lot of attention. And let me just pull up the post. And let's see, we have 22 people joining. So want to wait till just a few more people join. But basically, this is the post. You know, it got over 260,000 impressions, and the U.S. Department of Defense is engaging with SpaceX to explore the possibility of the government taking control of Starship for sensitive and potentially dangerous missions. This was first reported by Aviation Weekly, and there's been a lot of discussion about this on X as well as concern. And so I'm not an expert in this area, but Trent can help us maybe understand this a little bit more. First of all, give us some of your background, please.
All right. I was a 33-year veteran Defense Contract Management Agency. I worked as a quality inspector, auditor, team lead for various products, and eventually a quality staff specialist doing HR work for a 5-state area that included Texas, Oklahoma, parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And as such, I dealt with trucks, military aircraft, various subsystems for all of the above, and training for the people that did all the work in the last part of my career. So, amongst others, I have friends that are working for the Missile Defense Agency. I've got a coworker that was administering a defense contract with SpaceX in California who moved to Texas. So I've touched on some of that work indirectly.
Right. So you can speak about this a little better than I can.
All right. Your post, what Aviation Week was referring to was the Department of Defense trying to get space launch capability reserved for it. Under the Defense Production Act that was used during the COVID-19 emergency, the federal government has the power to go to any firm in the United States and say, we're the first person on the list of anything coming out of your firm. So getting access to Starship is already available through the Defense Production Act. What we're hearing sounds much more like the Civilian Reserve Air Fleet. And let me explain what CRAF, C-R-A-F, is. It is a subsidy program by the U.S. military to the airlines to modify a portion of airline fleets to be capable of doing defense missions in cases of defense emergency or major conflicts. Early in my career in 1988, I worked on a CRAF contract, which was basically an aeromedical evacuation kit that was to be installed in commuter planes to move mass casualties from Germany to the United States in the event of a war with the Soviet Union in Europe. What we're hearing sounds very much like the Space Force is trying to create a civilian reserve space fleet, or Starfleet, if you want to be facetious. Essentially, we're looking at the Department of Defense trying to put together some sort of subsidy program so some number of the Starships are available for moving defense payloads. And to give you an idea of the size of some of the satellites, look at the Hubble Space Telescope. When the Hubble Space Telescope was designed and built, there were satellites referred to in the media's case 12 that were theoretically roughly the same size and had mirrors roughly the same size. Instead of looking out in space, they were geared to looking at the Earth to try and validate and verify that the various nuclear arms control treaties were being followed. They were incredibly precise and able to measure diameters of missiles down to the inch. And this was important in order to validate the SALT and START treaties of that era. So essentially what the Pentagon is doing, since currently the two variants of Starship that are available either drop Starlink satellites or are built to go to the moon, they're probably negotiating with SpaceX to develop a version of Starship that is geared to moving something the size of this Hubble Space Telescope to low Earth orbit, or to move something like an old Rhyolite signals intelligence satellite into low Earth orbit with a really big kick stage to go up to geosynchronous. These would be from the National Security Agency or the National Reconnaissance Office. And having that capability available on call in emergency in case someone uses an anti-satellite weapon to knock out one of our high profile and very few spies machines would be something that, due diligence wise, the Department of Defense would do. It is their job.
Right. So I think part of the article and the post that I made that concerned people, in the proposed agreement, the Pentagon would fly Starship as a government controlled vehicle. So are we reading that correctly? Is that a bad thing?
Well, the Civilian Reserve Air Fleet, when the government punched it, and it's done it 3 times in the history of the program, took over a lot of civilian airliners. They were under military control. The crews were the airline crews. The maintenance people were still the same maintenance people, but they were flying chartered missions for the U.S. military. So yes, that is under U.S. government control. Now, are we talking the U.S. government buying those airlines? No. The U.S. government has a long history of taking over airlines in the event of war. We did that first in the Second World War. Pan Am was flying boats for the United States Navy in the Pacific, for example. The Civilian Reserve Air Fleet program was an extension of that World War II experience, and the last time it was used was for the evacuations from Afghanistan. So control is a word that has lots of different meanings. In this case, control may mean simply a lease. Right. If we're talking Starship, if the U.S. government pays SpaceX enough money to build 3 Starships that are capable of moving something the size of a Hubble Space Telescope, and say, we want you to build those and have them in a warehouse sitting there for us to use at any given time. Well, that is within the budget of the Space Force. The question is, bottom line, who owns it? And with craft, the federal government does not have to own the machine or the spacecraft or the airliner. It simply pays a subsidy to a firm to have it available at need.
Right.
So it sounds to me that we're looking for a civilian reserve space fleet rather than the U.S. government is reaching into SpaceX and controlling it. Well, a lease is a lease. That's a form of control. I'm paying you money for a service.
Right.
Well, that's control. He who has the money calls the tune.
Right. Well, this post has 470 comments, 152 shares, and many of them are, getting in bed with the government. Once you're in bed, the government never likes to get out of it. What's happening? Late stage civilization. I hope Elon doesn't go along with that. So a lot of negative commentary, which is why, I wanted to reach out to someone who has a better understanding of this. I just have an article from Aviation Week to work off of, which is now behind a paywall, by the way. Ross has a question for you. Ross is a dedicated viewer and has a better understanding of this too. How does CRAF affect the legal liabilities of the US DOD and of the launch provider, i.e. SpaceX?
Civilian airliners, anything that flies is covered by IATA, which is the international agreement, or IATA. If I remember, there are international treaties that cover airlines and then cover space. And if something in space crashes, the government of the nation involved is on the hook, which is why most governments demand that launch service providers have insurance. One of the things that you see is what's different about launch service providers is you don't insure the launch vehicle. You insure the payload, and the launch vehicle nominally is expendable, so you don't have to worry about it. We're entering a new era of insurance for launch vehicles with reusable vehicles. One of the things that Elon and SpaceX is going to have to do over the next few years is develop a new insurance model when you're dealing with reusable rockets. And right now you have the owner operator model, which was, oh, excuse me.
You're fine.
Sorry, I get calls. Early on in the history of airlines, the federal government said owner operators, we're going to split owners from the airlines. They have them split. Currently with space, we have the owner is also the operator. At some point, whether we have an antitrust law or whether there's simply so many starships that Elon can't use them all for his own purposes, some of them are going to be spun off and done by separate airline companies. There's going to have to be a business case model for using reusable starships by airliners, by space lines, as opposed to airlines, that is separate from the manufacturer. So this is something that you don't have a normal business without normal business insurance. And one of the things that I have not seen out of the space creator community is any interface with the insurance providers for space launchers and for the payloads. They're predominantly in Europe, not in the United States. This is something that Angry Astronaut, who you've cooperated with a few times, that's it, basically in his ballpark. Going forward, we're going to have to do a brand new insurance regime for dealing with space, and that has got to come from the people, the manufacturers of reusable starships. They have got to hold trade fairs with insurance companies to ascertain what is the risk for a reusable vehicle and what do I charge for it. If I don't know the risk, then my liability is unlimited. You will not get insurance.
Right.
Easy enough.
I've never thought of space liner compared to airliner. It's so new, right?
Well, yes, in regards going to space, but no in regards to we've had airliners a long time. I mean, we've kept the manufacturers and the operators separate because of antitrust in the United States. And the reality is, if you're going to have a massive private presence in space, you're going to have to create a space insurance market. And it is incumbent on the manufacturers of reusable vehicles, that is SpaceX and all the other startups like Stokes and I'm blanking on. You could probably run them better than I can.
Blue Origin, Relativity.
All of them have got to get together and have a trade fair with the insurance companies to try and establish what is the risk for reusable starships. So at some point, they can sell their vehicles to a space line so that they can do runs for civilians up to all of these private space stations that we're hearing about in all the various press now.
Well, Bruce makes a good point. Maybe he sees this as a good thing. He says if the DOD is now involved, maybe they can light a fire under the FAA to expedite Starship licenses.
I would hope so. Let's be honest. The FAA is funded primarily for airlines. It has not gotten any additional money from Congress to deal with space issues. And with the launch rate going up asymptotically, let's be honest, space is going to become a major component of the FAA budget. It's going to have to, the FASA, or maybe spin off part of the FAA into a space agency. I don't know. There's going to need to be a regulatory body that deals with space, and it's going to have to be able to do things like, is it properly insured? That's, the FAA does that for airlines. You can't fly unless you've got proper business insurance, so that the U.S. government is not on the hook for damages done by an airliner somewhere around the world. So you need to do the same thing with space vehicles at some point if you're talking reusable rockets.
Well, I do want to bring up, just because you did kind of touch on it a little bit, maybe about an hour and a half ago, I put up a video about new information we have about the Alaska Airlines flight where the door basically flew off. That had no bolts installed, and Elon actually commented saying no bolts. And I saw you comment as well, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add on about the aviation administration as it is.
All right. The Federal Aviation Administration has very few inspectors, and it has a program in which it delegates down to various firms an FAA certified inspectors that looks at things. Now, one of the things that is coming from a lot of the aviation YouTube content providers is that you have a firm called Spirit that's in Wichita that used to be part of Boeing that does the airframes that include that section that had no bolts. And Boeing is in the process of trying to increase its production rate from 35 a month to 50 a month. So you're seeing a lot of airframes leave Wichita and going to Boeing incomplete.
Wow.
And there's a problem interfacing between the Boeing and the Spirit Aviation people on getting that particular door done correctly. This is something that's shown up on various providers. I wish I had excuse me. I wish I could give you and the people I'll probably have to go on my X account and throw some of the people out there who've been covering this real well. And who knows, maybe you can interview him so you can get some of that background. My background in understanding this is, for the first 7 or so years of my career, I was an aircraft depot level maintenance facility in Greenville, Texas, that amongst other things did the Presidential Air Fleet and nuclear command posts. So we tore everything down to bare metal, and we followed all the Boeing air modifications to put it all back together and bring it into service up to all the different mods. So when something is missing like this, you're looking at, it's a major production quality manufacturing escape. So something very fundamental in the quality control system, likely interface between Spirit and Boeing, fell apart. And my understanding from the content providers is the Boeing and the Spirit electronic quality systems do not interface. So you've got to do something manual between the two to make sure it happens. And if it's not documented properly by somebody, there's an escape. There's the possibility of an escape. The FAA has come out already and said, thou shalt not increase production rate to 50 a month to Boeing for the 737. So what that tells me is the FAA has lost confidence in the quality control between those two companies for the 737. And it is in the process of working through how far back in the production line has this interface problem been going on, so they can figure out what is the range of aircraft that need to be inspected and fixed. And that is a really hard thing. And I tip my hat to the FAA investigators that are grinding their way through that, because they have a whole lot of records to work through.
Well, it's crazy just reading, articles on this report. Apparently, pilots notified them 3 times that there were depressurization warnings, and they said that they couldn't fly it to Hawaii over the water, but they could still fly it over land. It's crazy. It seems like this really should have been prevented. So, I'm not super keen on flying myself. I fly all the time, but it does make me nervous sometimes. And, do you think that this anxiety is warranted?
Look, the 737 MAX was created to meet a specific market niche. And they went when Boeing did it, they started from that marketing rather than from an engineering side, and this resulted in the problems that they had with the software for the airplane with its larger engines. And what we're hearing here is a different problem, but it again flows to Boeing is more concerned about the marketing side, from what I'm hearing, than it is about controlling the engineering side. And until you get the engineering side right, you shouldn't be flying the airplanes.
Right.
It's fundamental. You have to maintain the confidence of the general flying public that the airlines and the aircraft the airlines are flying are safe. That is the FAA's job. And at this point, it's going to have to go deeply into the Boeing and Spirit quality manufacturing system to try and figure out what is the range of effect and what we have to do, we, referring to the airlines, to fix the aircraft to assure the public. There's going to have to be a major report from the FAA detailing where things went wrong and how they are being fixed and what aircraft are affected in what airlines. And that is an extremely politically charged document, and meeting the public requirements for safety, and also dealing with the fact that Boeing as an American airline company is considered by a lot of the political class as being too big to allow to be failed. I would err strongly on the side of safety over those political concerns, because if the public does not believe in the airlines, then it doesn't matter whether Boeing produces planes or not. It will not be able to sell them because there won't be airlines flying.
Right.
You've got to make sure the public trusts the airlines. And to do that, you have to make sure the airplanes are safe. That's what the FAA has to make as its top priority here. And if that requires the Congress at some point giving the FAA more money to not only beef up its space side, but especially provide more resources so they have more inspectors to go out and review things, then that needs to be done. It is important for much larger, the airlines and our air transportation system, that this get done right.
Right.
Rather than trying and help Boeing get over a bump, we need to make sure the system as a whole is safe for the public. That's got to be the number one concern in all of this.
Well, and the FAA is already stretched pretty thin with just their regular duties. We're going to see a higher cadence of Starship launches. And so hopefully they can get the resources that they need to adequately do their job.
Well, look, I've been watching the U.S. Congress on things like the border and aid to Ukraine and aid to Israel. We have a completely dysfunctional political class in Congress. And something like public safety for airliners seems to be small beer compared to things like Ukraine and the fight in Israel. And heck, even the Houthi shooting at our maritime shipping seems to have higher concern than the safety of the public on airlines. And considering how often that congressmen and senators fly, this makes no sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense to me either. Oh my gosh. Well, check out this comment. Starship development must remain 100% commercial. DOD requirements force the STS to be too large and complex, eventually causing the program to fail. What do you think about that?
Elon Musk has a saying to the effect that high production rates fix a lot of problems. If Elon is producing 300 Starships a year, having 3 or 4 that can carry up something the size of a Hubble Space Telescope as a part of that fleet of 300 isn't going to break his bank or anyone else's. I've been frankly amazed by the ability of SpaceX to iterate lots of different variants of the Starship in a production line. That is something that you have for statistical process control. You've got to build 20 of anything in order to be able to use it. And he's iterating from ship to ship to ship to ship.
Right.
A whole number of changes, thousands, and he's making it better on each flight. When I say he, I mean all the engineers that work for him, because frankly, those are the guys that make the rockets fly.
Right.
But paying SpaceX some money so that they modify 3 variants that are built for large payloads so that they can have extra fittings to put in something like a spy machine satellite. Well, that's normal DOD business that's gone on for decades with the airlines. So that's not going to turn into a space shuttle for SpaceX, because their business model is built on lots of hardware. If you have lots of hardware, modifying 3 or 4 for DOD missions that, I want those 3 ships sitting in a hangar, and I'm going to pay you this much money per year so that they're available when I call you. Well, they're already doing that with Electron, the Electron. Trying to remember the company that does the Electron, because they've got a contract with the NSA to launch satellites.
Is that Rocket Lab? Is that Rocket Lab?
Rocket Lab, I think that. This is something that we're seeing already with Rocket Lab. So there's no reason that can't happen for 3 or 4 Starships built to carry big satellites for the Department of Defense. If he's building 300 rockets or 300 Starships to go on his Starship or his super boosters, what's 3 out of 300?
Right.
For SpaceX, it will be chump change. And since we're dealing with a company that has got several million people that are paying him $100 or anything up to $10,000 a month for Starlink, at some point he's going to get 30 million people worldwide. That's a big monthly income. Having the DOD say, here's 100 million to modify 3 Starships, and here's another 50 million a month or a year to keep them in a specialized hangar. Well, if he's got 300, if 3 million, 4 million, 5 million people that are paying him $100 to $10,000 a month, that's not a big deal for him. I mean, orders of magnitude mean thing.
Right. Well, you're doing a great job, by the way, of answering these rapid fire questions. We really didn't prepare at all, everyone. So thank you for being so willing to speak live at the last minute. Ross wants to know, how does this compare to the responsive launch contracts that Firefly Aerospace has won from the U.S. Space Force? So how does this idea of the Pentagon, controlling a Starship compare to that?
Well, here's the thing. We don't know what's in the contract negotiations between the Department of Defense and SpaceX. We don't know what the Department of Defense actually wants. And we have to accept the fact that Aviation Week wrote the headline in a way that it would get clicks and draw attention. That's modern media in the 21st century. So, saying that, we're doing a civilian reserve air fleet contract for space launchers doesn't quite have the clickbait potential of U.S. government taking control of Starship.
Right. Exactly. Well, it got a lot of attention on my page too. So that's why I saw so many negative comments and kind of fear-based comments that I thought that maybe we could break it down a little bit. I think that this has been helpful. Let's see if there.
Go ahead. With the Defense Production Act, the Department of Defense has all the authority it needs to walk into SpaceX saying the next 10 flights belong to us. That's already the law. If we're seeing additional negotiations, it's because the Department of Defense wants the design of Starship to be changed in such a way to meet very specific DOD launch requirements. That spells spy machines. That spells, there's no other answer for that particular negotiation that makes sense to anyone.
Well, let's try to break this down a little more because there still seems to be some confusion. Thaddeus writes, just so long as this is a voluntary exchange and SpaceX gets to say no to any price, then I will not complain for SpaceX. You're saying maybe that's not the case.
If the Defense Production Act is invoked, and it's been invoked 3 times for the airlines, then the Department of Defense has a lease on the lift capability of Starship right there. All right. So that doesn't mean that they own it, that they being the Department of Defense, or that they're actually flying it. What they have is a lease for the use of the vehicle. We did this in World War II with Pan Am and the other airlines. We've done it 3 times since the Civilian Reserve Air Fleet was started for Desert Storm and the evacuation of Afghanistan, and for, I think, Operation Iraqi Freedom. It's on the wiki. When you look up Civilian Reserve Air Fleet, it'll list the 3 operations wherein the U.S. government took control of part of the civilian airlines. What you're seeing is the airline model being moved to the space launchers. And what happened with Firefly, is they got a uh, a contract saying, we reserve the right to buy 3 launches. Here's money. You will get more money after the execution of the launch. I mean, that's business.
Yeah.
With SpaceX, there has to be some sort of change to Starship to meet DOD payload interface requirements. That means money from somebody. They've got to negotiate, they being DOD, has got to negotiate with SpaceX for some variant of Starship that will meet DOD requirements. And quite possibly we, the Department of Defense, want to buy those and have you operate them for us. Government-owned, contract-oriented, GOCO. When we need them. And we want to take control of the telemetry because we're going to be doing something with a NRO or NSA satellite that we don't want anyone to hear. You know, we want to use a special encryption and not use the uplinks and downlinks for SpaceX. I mean, we have to remember SpaceX has already done a number of military payloads, so it's familiar with those requirements. So, you know, we're talking essentially the Department of Defense giving SpaceX money to modify Starship to meet a DOD requirement and possibly invoke something like the Civilian Reserve Air Fleet for space, Civilian Reserve Starfleet.
So, in your opinion, is this a good thing? Should we not be overreacting? And this is actually beneficial to everyone.
The more that space is like airline business, the better it is for everyone, because we're creating a situation wherein the government is buying a service from a private firm. All right. The reality is, if we want to have a spacefaring civilization, then we're going to need to have the instruments to do that. Contracts, insurance, long-term, contracts that we have had with airlines moved over to our space launch service providers. And at some point, I'm expecting the Congress sometime in the next 20 years is going to force the split between rocket manufacturers and the operators of rockets, because it happened before because of antitrust concerns. We are currently in a very pro-monopolistic kind of environment, but as SpaceX gets more and more powerful from the sheer size of the cash flow that's going to come from Starlink, you're likely going to see at some point the American federal government say, we want to break that up because that's getting so big that you can buy us all, and we don't like that.
Right. Someone wrote that you are an absolute wealth of knowledge on all things aerospace. Very impressive. This interview is going great. So I'm super thankful to you for coming on the channel. You really do know your stuff. So this person, Tracefire, I'm not sure how to say this, says that DOD should adapt to Starship's eventual capabilities, not the other way around. Starship is too important.
It boils down to the question of what is going to fit within the payload area of Starship. At some point, Starship is going to have to create a big door to unleash a huge satellite. Well, if the Department of Defense comes along and says, here's money to do that, SpaceX is going to look at that and say, thank you for your money. We'll use that to build something that we plan to do anyway.
Right.
So if we're dealing with lots of different variants of Starship, then the Department of Defense paying for 3 or 4 or 5 of 300 to be able to do a very specific capability that is DOD specific and give a subsidy so that, maybe that Elon is using it for commercial payloads on a, 1 out of 3 basis at any given time. But if we need it, if the Department of Defense needs it, it can come off of that and get stuck into the DOD queue. The reality is SpaceX is such a unique capability in terms of heavy lift launch that the federal government of the United States is going to use them. And if it's going to use that capability, then adapting existing airline contract instrumentalities to space launch, so it's just another business, is good for that building of the private sector public interface so that everyone knows what the rules are. And at some point, there's going to be insurance service providers providing coverage so that someone that's lifting one of these private space stations that's going to be for space tourists can get insurance for the people going up in Starship in the same way that right now you can get per flight insurance for you flying on an airline. I mean, one of the complaints that Elon has, look, why is NASA demanding a escape system on Starship? Well, the answer is because I can't get insurance for anyone on Starship because it's a rocket. No one insures people on rockets. Well, that's why NASA demands an escape system for its capsules. If we're at some future time and I can get a flight insurance, astronauts use airliners, and airliners don't have escape systems because you can get insurance for the people flying on them. Essentially, if I can get insurance to fly on a rocket, then NASA isn't going to need to have an escape system built in Starship. Making space flight a normal business activity with normal business insurance means everybody can go. We're not there yet.
We're not.
And, at some point in the future when Starship is flying 2 or 3 times a week and there are hundreds of launches, there's going to have to be a sit down between SpaceX and the other reusable launch vehicles people and the insurance company people, have a trade show to quantify the risks so that people that fly on the vehicles can get insurance. So a private company can fly a private astronaut and they have insurance for them. Life insurance that in case something happens, you can get that for an airliner. You can't right now for Dragon.
Right.
The answer is it's not a normal business if it doesn't have normal business insurance.
Right. Which it's still a process and it's going to be an evolution. Ross wants to know, and of course this is speculation, but what do you speculate Elon Musk's view is on this proposal, on this discussion for cooperation?
Name a price that I like. He's a capitalist. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're already, doing business. So it's not completely out of the ordinary.
This is another business case of several that Elon Musk and SpaceX have with the federal government. All right. He's got contracts with NASA for human landing system on the moon. He's got Falcon Heavy flying lots of national security payloads. This is just another contract in his portfolio from DOD. And if it's run like the Civilian Reserve Air Fleet, it's going to be a model for Stokes, for all the other reusable launch vehicle service providers that are trying to follow in the jet stream that SpaceX has created. It's time for people to be thinking of space as just another place you do business and just another place where you have business insurance. Normal businesses have normal business insurance against normal business events. If we're going to colonize space, to create settlements on the moon and Mars, and create huge industrial facilities in space, there's got to be a development of a market for insurance covering all of the above. And I view creating a craft-like contract instrumentality for Starship as one of the baby steps leading to that eventuality.
I don't know if you know the answer to this. I'm not sure if this is typed correctly, but have the tourist flights of Blue and Virgin not settled on the insurance industry? So I'm guessing they're asking, what is their insurance policy?
I don't know. I don't know what sort of insurance is being provided by Blue or Virgin. The reality is they're flying into space, and they're also flying through FAA-controlled airspace. So there has to be some sort of insurance flying through FAA-controlled airspace if you're flying a manned vehicle, a crewed vehicle. So, that would be something that I don't know, Ellie might want to interview some people over at Virgin about, hey, what's their insurance regime like?
Right. This is giving me a lot of inspiration and ideas for who else might be good for this story. And so let's see. I think I'll just maybe wrap up on a good question from Ross. What additional space governance changes do you think are good ideas for the future of commercial space flight?
There's going to have to be some sort of regulatory regime for space debris in low Earth orbit. There's got to be some sort of cleanup mechanism. That is, there's got to be a space tug service that will go up and deorbit satellites that have lost control. And somebody's going to have to pay for that. And whether this is done like the FDIC, where each of the banks provide a certain amount of money to provide an insurance fund to do that, or some other model, we don't know yet. But there needs to be, with the number of satellites that are going to go into the low Earth orbit in the next 10 years, there needs to be some sort of regulatory mechanism for space tugs to go up and deorbit out of control hardware. And let's be honest, this is a tragedy of the common situation. Until something happens, nobody's going to do anything. And right now, if there are a couple of private companies that are trying to do space tugs that are Methalox powered, that can go on to the various new reusable vehicles that use methane. That is going to be probably the basis for this sort of space tug in the future. Because if SpaceX is putting up a depot in orbit that's got fuel, and you've got a Methalox tug, having it come by every so often, refuel, and go off and do deorbits until it needs to be reserviced and it's brought back down by a reusable vehicle of some sort. That is going to have to happen. There is no getting around the fact that you can't lie about physics. You put too many things in too small a space, they're going to collide. And the possibility of a chain reaction filling of low Earth orbit with debris is getting too high for us not to act ahead of time.
Right. By the way, thank you to Bimmer Gazer for the generous $50 super chat of a very important topic. You have done a great job of breaking it down for us. And man, the questions just keep rolling in. A lot of people are enjoying this interview. Stephen wants to know, will there be insurance against the Kessler syndrome or some tax in case of that scenario paid to governments?
I'm expecting that we're going to see some sort of regulatory regime. And basically, there is no international body to try and create a tax regime to provide insurance against the Kessler syndrome. That is the chain reaction breakup of satellites in low Earth orbit. This is something that we're going to have when we have at some point in the future this trade fair between insurance companies and space launch providers. That's going to be one of the things that is going to have to be addressed. And frankly, we really need to see SpaceX as the foremost satellite launcher and reusable rocket user lead on this. And I haven't seen anything from Elon. That is a question that someone has to shoot at him. What are you going to do about creating insurance? You know, SpaceX is creating a space launch market, is creating space internet. It needs to create space insurance as a leader and to bring all the other space launch companies into this. Because if they don't do it, the governments will, and if they have to do it after some sort of disaster, you're going to have no say in what that's going to be. So better to create a trade association that will address this public need and do it in such a way that nobody loses their shirt.
Right.
You know, this is the smart way to go. I don't know if SpaceX is going to be smart on this. I'm just saying it. This is something that needs to happen. Elon Musk and SpaceX has got to lead on this. There's no one else.
I think there seems to be still a little bit of confusion about the insurance. So, for example, was the Inspiration 4 mission not insured?
I have not heard anything in any of the stuff that's come out on the Inspiration 4 mission that said that any of them were individually insured. Most people that fly in space sign a release of liability.
Right.
And that leaves basically only the international air treaties for the amount of money that you will get in case someone dies.
Right.
So, yeah, if you're in a situation where you're signing releases, that's not a normal business. That is not survivable, not sustainable. At some point, there will be an accident and there will be litigation. It will go on for years and it will cost a lot of money. Far better to create a commercial space market that addresses the issue ahead of time. So all it has to do is, okay, we're going to insurance. There are various bodies for dealing with insurance. It's simple. Insurance companies don't pay quickly because the insurance companies are in the job of keeping money and making a percentage in the markets, holding that money. But having an insurance regime will necessarily make the private expansion into lunar orbit and onward to Mars much easier than a situation where you have to sign a release.
Right. Well, Peter appears to know your content. Thanks for the great stream. And thanks, Mr. Telenko, for those great logistics threads on Twitter. So you guys, if you want to follow Trent, he has or X, I guess. He has a pretty large X account. And what is your handle? I'll make a
at Trent Telenko.
No J?
Nope.
At Trent Telenko. So I will add this so you guys can see it. Give him a follow. Does that look correct?
That looks correct. And if I'm wrong about my own name, that's on me.
You have done a great job of helping us, decipher and understand all of this. I'd love to have you on the show again in the future. I have a couple of recurring guests, and so I'm very thankful that you agreed to go live. I reached out to him maybe 3 hours ago, and with no notice, you decided yes on the same day. So we really appreciate your knowledge, your foresight, and yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
If I had any questions to ask Elon Musk, I would ask him, what are your plans for the future for industrializing space? Because he's talking about using his Starlink to fund colonizing Mars, but there's a whole lot that needs to go on between Mars and the moon, and between the moon and Earth, that is going to require the use of Starship.
Right.
And if we're going to be industrializing, what is he thinking in terms of how do we do that? Because you've got to have normal business markets to do stuff. It's not just, I'm going to take money from Starlink and build a colony on the moon. You've got to have ability to make money in space, to circulate in space, so that you can keep feeding the industry to go forward. Because look, it costs a lot of money to get from the bottom of Earth's gravity well into low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit is halfway to anywhere in the solar system. Well, to make space a private concern going forward, we've got to industrialize in low Earth orbit on outward. And to do that, we need normal business activities. He needs to be, what is he going to do to create that business market?
Right.
Not just his personal market, but where's his trade association? How is he developing the private firms to go forward to do that? He's going to need a lot of contractors to build his city on Mars. It ain't going to be all start the SpaceX.
Right. Great question. And I don't know, he commented on my post today, so maybe I'll try and ask it.
Well, throw that question at him. Maybe he'll answer that.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, if you're willing to come back on the show, I might reach out to you in a few weeks.
All right, cool.
Awesome.
Just give me a little more than 3 hours next time.
Okay, I will, for sure. Maybe we can have a chat, like a panel. You, Angry Astronaut, potentially Scott Manley.
Oh, I'd love to talk to the man. He's fascinating. I've watched a lot of his stuff.
Jonathan McDowell, I'm sure, would join. Okay, maybe we need to have a future predictions sort of discussion.
All right. Sounds good to me. You can arrange it. I'll wave my hand. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Everyone enjoyed it. And so thank you guys for hanging out with us tonight, and we'll see you soon.
All right.